Hi everybody, I'm Zak Foster. Thank you so much for joining me today because I want to share with you one of my favorite quick gift projects, the idea of a tiny quilt. Take a look. Here's one for you. This one made from natural fibers, natural dyes. Here's one made from repurposed materials, old clothes. Here's another natural dyed one. And I love tiny quilts. You know, sometimes I call them talisman quilts as well. If you're trying to work a certain intention into your life, this is a good thing to hold space. You can also make them as like pocket squares, something that somebody can keep in their pocket if they're going through a rough time and they need some comfort. So no matter what you call them, join me as we talk about how to do patchwork using things like the classic running stitch, the back stitch, the whip stitch. There's so many good things to learn. So join me, let's have some fun sewing tiny quilts together. One of the things I love about these tiny quilts is that they allow you to dig into your fabric stash and really get some good pieces out. You know, as you may know, I do a lot of natural dyeing as well with fabrics, and I cannot bear to part with beautiful pieces of fabric, no matter how tiny they may be, because they're still good for something, like making tiny quilts. Okay, so these are perfect size little scraps. Go into your fabric stash, see what you have. This piece right here is a good preview of what we're going to be working on today. We're going to be hand sewing these scraps together using a couple different stitches. And we'll go into more details in just a moment. First things first, you got to cut your fabric. So I'm going to start here with this light indigo fabric that I have here. And this fabric, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was a piece of white oak, or maybe acorn. All right, so I'm just cutting a piece. I use my rotary blade. I love that. It's nice and quick. You can also use scissors. And you can cut them about the same size, not the same size. You can cut that down to half if you want to. The most important thing, though, is that they have two edges that are approximately the same length. Because what we're going to do is put those two edges together. And we're going to sew a seam. You can see where I machine piece this one on a different project. We're going to sew a seam right along that line. That's kind of perfect. Okay. Now, if you don't know how to do a quilter's knot, let me share with you something revolutionary. Thread your needle. Take the end of your thread in one hand. Let's get a little closer so you can see. And then put them facing each other like they're talking. Hey, how you doing? You are going to pinch the end of the thread, coil it around the needle, you know, whatever your favorite number is, 3, 4, 5, something like that. Slip that coil to your opposite hand, and holding that coil, you know, tight against the needle, push the needle through the coil, slowly drawing the thread through the coil. Don't let go. And hopefully, if all goes well, in just a moment, between my thumb and my finger, I will feel that coil tighten into a little knot. Let's see. Hey, there we go. That's a pretty nice little knot. Okay, this saves me so much time when it comes to sewing fabrics. All right, now, next step. We're going to do what's called a running stitch, 1/4 of an inch down from the top. You don't want to get closer than 1/4 of an inch because the fabric needs a certain amount of bulk just to stay strong. Right? And hand-sewn stitches can be very strong, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a minute. But for a running stitch, it's what most people think of when they think of sewing. You just go in and out, trying to make them even as possible. But if they're not, guess what? We ain't going to stress it. Okay, so here you see I've gotten, 4 stitches done. I like every once in a while, about every inch or so, to do what we call a back stitch. We just go back 1 stitch where the thread went into the top of the fabric, and then we just make 1 stitch the exact same width. Okay. What that does is it locks this seam. So God forbid if this seam ever pops, which it won't in a tiny quilt, but like in a larger project one day, if you're doing like a bed quilt or a throw quilt, that could happen. So we do this back stitch so that if the seam pops, it won't unravel. If it does, it'll unravel till it hits that back stitch, and then it'll stop. So this is just a little bit of quilty insurance for you. Okay, then we carry on with our running stitch. Again, trying to keep them the same size, but not worrying if they're not. When we get to the end of our patch here, ooh, yeah, look, that was a little bit fat. That's okay. Ain't gonna hurt anybody. When we get to the end, we're gonna secure our seam with 2 or 3 back stitches. You could use a knot, I guess, but I just find this to be quicker and easier. Okay. And I'm not even going to trim the thread for what we're about to do next. I'm going to leave it whole. All right, so we've got our running stitch all the way down. Our patches are now joined. If we open them up, we see that beautiful back and forth play of how the stitches pull the fabrics to each other. Now, this next step is optional, but let me recommend it to you for a couple reasons. This is a basting stitch that I picked up from watching Jude Hill work. And if you don't know Jude Hill, find her on Instagram. Her handle is Spirit Cloth. Okay, you can take your thumbnail and just do a quick little rough and tumble press, almost as good as an iron. What do you think? Okay. Then, remember that our thread is still attached? We're going to do a basting stitch, just about 1/8 of an inch now, following the seam line. And I'll show you what I mean by a basting stitch. A basting stitch is great for holding layers of fabric together, but it doesn't show very much because we're only going to get a little bit on top. We're going to run quite a distance under the fabric and then peek back up. Now here's the trick. You see how much needle I have sticking out there? That's all you want. You're just picking up a thread or two. Okay? Even if you can only get 1 thread, that'll work. Just depends on how precise you're feeling that day. And once you get going, this doesn't take long at all. I'm going slow because I want to make sure y'all have a nice experience, but this whole thing maybe takes an additional 30 seconds a patch, minute a patch. But what I like about it, watch this. This is the part I think you're going to like too. We just pull it through. So not only is our patch now laying, I'll show you that in a second. Not only is our patch now laying flatter, it has this beautiful little dimple texture right there. We're going to do the same thing down the other side. On the back side, you see most of the thread. That's going to help our seam stay pressed open and laying flat. This technique I find I really like when I'm traveling. I make a lot of traveling quilts where I will use fabric that I kind of pick up on the road in one way or another. Maybe somebody gives it to me. Maybe I find some discarded clothing somewhere. And since I'm traveling, I often don't have an iron. And so this is a good way to get around that. You know, assuming flat patchwork is something you're going for. Okay, so now we have run our basting stitch all the way down the other side. We're just going to kind of massage it a little bit. And look at how cute that is. I could do that all day. So what I'm going to do now is make another patch, because like I told you, we're going to make a 4-patch quilt. We're using the exact same idea. So we're going to join 2 more patches, and then we'll join those 2 patches to each other. In fact, I can show you right here. Ta-da! I already have this one made. And so what you're going to see me do is join these 2 together, and then we'll have a complete quilt top. I'm going to trim my thread. We no longer need that. For this patch, I'm going to line up my patches down here in whatever way. Like, it can be a little bit wonky. I usually actually don't like my seam lines to line up perfectly. I like my fabrics to be fabrics. You know what I'm saying? It's not steel. It's not glass. It's soft. It's organic. Okay, but we do find ourselves with a situation where this bottom piece is a little bit longer. So what do? Boom. Give it a little haircut. And maybe we save this for another project. If nothing else, you can put it out in your garden and maybe a little sparrow will pick it up in the spring and build a nest. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay. If for any reason, you see here, let me get closer for you. You see how we have an irregular edge here? You could trim that off. Or if you have like a really wonky edge. Do I have one laying around? No, I don't, unfortunately. If you had a really wonky edge, the trick to getting irregular shapes to line up is this. Put the wonky one on the bottom, put the line that you want to mimic and sew along on top, and then you just whoop, trim them to match. And what that does, it creates 2 mirror images of the same angled line, and when you sew them together and then press them open, they will lie perfectly flat. It's a magic trick. So I'm going to re-knot my thread. Remember, face to face, pinch, coil 3 or 4 times, or whatever your favorite number is. pinch that coil, pull it through, et voila, you got a little knot. We're doing the exact same stitch, starting about 1/4 of an inch in and 1/4 of an inch down. And we're just gonna run through. Ooh, this indigo fabric on top that's so blue is a wonderful fabric, but I think it was an old bed sheet or something, and it's really densely woven. So if it looks like I'm struggling, I kind of am. Look how pretty those stitches are. I'm gonna do my back stitch to keep it safe, and then watch. This is a second occasion in which I really like to use a back stitch. I hadn't shown you this yet. We're getting there. When you hit your intersection, right, between two patches, you can secure them even more by doing a back stitch around, kind of lassoing all of those patches together on the top and the bottom if you got them. Okay, watch that. Again, not so critical for a tiny quilt like you and I are making right now, but helpful if you're doing a larger project where strength really is an issue. Oops, scusi. Yeah, let's do another back stitch right here. What do you say? We'll finish with the back stitch. Hey, we'll finish with the back stitch, or 2 or 3. I really don't know what the magic number is here, by the way, but if you wonder what I do, you see it's 3. Okay, yee. Now these two are joined, looking beautiful, looking zigzaggy. I'm gonna press them open. The rough and tumble iron method with your thumbnail. And then I'm gonna do my basting stitch down both sides. You can experiment here. You know, I say only pick up a thread or 2, but I've seen some nice basting stitches where people go a little longer. And that's okay. Just see what feels good to you. You are the artist. Oh, we're back on that tough blue fabric. Ew. Sometimes the needle goes, I won't say that. Sometimes the needle hurts. But needle, you are a good tool, and I appreciate you being here. If you're wondering what these other fabrics are, the pink one is avocado. Who knew that avocados had pink inside of them? I didn't before about a year ago. Okay, we're going to cross over to the back side to do another second row of basting stitches. Now you see this little, you see how that happens? Now, if this bothers you, or if you're making a larger quilt where strength really is an issue, then let me recommend that you, instead of pressing open your seams, you push them both to one side. That's going to give you a stronger seam. That's especially important with hand quilting. Machine quilting, I don't know if it's as important. For what you and I are doing today, though, that's going to be okay. Another idea around that is that you could always quilt it down. Now, we're not going to quilt our tiny quilts. You'll see, you know, we're just leaving them kind of, they're small enough they don't really need quilting to hold together. But you could quilt them down and sew all those layers together to really anchor and secure those seams if you wanted to. Okay, and with that, folks, our quilt top is done. So our next step is going to be to take some backing fabric and cut out the exact same piece. I'm going to use some of this. This pink is madder. It's a little bit different. I like using something a little bit thicker. You see, this is some, I don't know what this is. I'm just going to rough homespun cotton. It's a little bit thicker, which is going to give form and shape and give a little bit of integrity to the overall quilt. What you do is you just lay it down and you cut out the exact same shape that you have. Now this is the time if you want to do any edits to the overall shape of your quilt. Let's say you want to, I don't know, put a little curve in there or something. Now that's the time to cut if you want. What you do want to try to avoid, however, is cutting through a seam that you've already made, because it will unravel up until that back stitch, right? The back stitch will stop it, but why cut it if you don't have to? Okay, so now what we got is a quilt top and a quilt back and a stowaway. We're going to put what we call right sides facing together. So this is the right side, the top. So we're just going to flip it around, and we're going to run a stitch along 3 sides of this so that eventually we can insert a little piece of batting if we want, and we may even put a little string on it so people can hang it up. Now this is the time, if you do think you would like to hang your tiny quilt, sometimes it's nice to just have what I call a pocket quilt, something to carry in your pocket. Sometimes you want to hang it. You know, I have friends that display these year round. They'll hang them on a dresser knob, on a bathroom mirror. You can put them on your Christmas tree, of course. I love doing that. But there's a lot of reasons why you may want to hang a tiny quilt. So if you want to do that, I recommend getting a piece of cord that you like, about 8 inches or so. No magic number there. Tie it into a loop. There we go. We got our loop. And we're going to snuggle it inside. I know this felt counterintuitive to me for a long time, but we're going to snuggle it inside so that when we flip the whole thing inside out, our loop is on the outside. What we don't want to happen is to hide our loop on the inside where it won't do us any good. Okay, so I've got my loop down there. The knot is on top because that knot is what's going to anchor the loop into the fabric. And I'm going to continue doing the same running stitch that I was doing, though I will do a few, let's see how many I'm feeling like doing, a few back stitches right through here, just to anchor real nice that loop into our tiny quilt. You know, I've made these for, of course, the holidays, but I've also made them for friends when loved ones have passed away. It's so nice to have just a little memento, a little something that just holds space for our loved ones when they're no longer physically with us. Sometimes I use fabric if they've given me fabric that's special to them. Sometimes I embroider. I've been known to put people's initials on these tiny quilts. I don't know. Some of these different little things you can do to show your love and support in a time like that. Okay, so our loop is now pretty well secured with some pretty wide back stitches, but you know what? They're going to do the trick. We're going to carry on now, and we'll meet up again once I've got all these running stitches done on 3 sides. Okay, so here comes the fun part. We have our quilt top, we have our quilt back, we have our hanging loop, if we're using one, inside of this pocket that we've just made. It's been stitched down on 3 sides. The bottom is still open, and so what we're going to do, get ready for the big reveal, is we flip it inside out. Our little loop, if we have one, can be a good friend here to get this turned inside out. If you have a pin handy or a chopstick is real nice, something to get up in those corners. You know, sometimes what I do is I'll trim the corners. Let me show you how I do that. Just to get rid of some of that bulk. If you've ever made clothes, you're familiar with this idea. Just to get rid of some of that bulk so you get a sharper, crisper corner that lies flat. Okay, so all I'm going to do here is just trim off Not that much. Maybe a little on that side. Not too much. Right. We'll do it over here too. And you'll see how that gives us a nice, so we're taking off maybe about half of the seam allowance right there at the corner. That shouldn't compromise the integrity of your piece. It should just help it lie a little bit nicer there in the corner. And let's see what we think. Again, a chopstick is really helpful here. A child with small fingers would be awesome. I don't have one of those. That's pretty good. Okay, now at this point, we have like a little miniature sleeping bag, which if you were a little gnome would probably be just the perfect thing to sleep in. What we need to do now is stuff our quilt and then seal up this third end, this fourth end, you know, whatever. Okay, so we're almost there. I'm gonna get some batting and I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, so I went to my supply closet, got a little piece of batting. Never throw away batting, you can always find a use for it. And so what I'm gonna do, maybe it'll be more helpful to see it like this. I need to cut a piece, not exactly the same size, because that's gonna be way too bulky to fit inside our little sleeping bag here. We're gonna cut a generous 1/4 of an inch smaller on all 4 sides. And you know how I do, I just kind of go with the flow and feel it. You're welcome to measure if you would like. Nothing wrong with that. We're going to test this and see how we like it. Okay, so on 3 sides, it's nearly perfect. Down here, however, there you go. And the reason we're going shorter like this, smaller like this, is because inside our tiny quilt here, of course, we have all these bulky seams. So that's going to give us some filler here, so we don't need that. Okay, now we gently insert the batting into our quilt. And this just takes a little finagling. Slow and steady. Smoothing it out on the inside as you go. You don't want any corners turned, don't want any wrinkles. Now that's nice. I can sleep under that. Well, a very small part of me could sleep under that. Okay, so you can see down inside, we got a little batting, right? This is feeling nice and plump. What we're gonna do now is turn our seam allowance inside of our tiny quilt. About 1/4 of an inch, but you know, look, I'm getting kind of fat there. That's like closer to 1/2 an inch. Measure if you want. I don't, because look, that looks just fine, doesn't it? One thing I do find helpful here, before we do our whip stitch, our 3rd stitch I'll show you, is to press it. If you have an iron, you can press it that way, or you can just do our little primitive press on both sides. That just helps the fabric cooperate with us in just a moment when we whip stitch these together. Now, hey, the thread's got a knot in it, and not the good kind. Okay, we're good. Hi, how you doing? Pinch coil, pull through, boom, knot, works like a charm. Now, a whip stitch is nice for being kind of a disappearing stitch so that you don't see it so much in the finished product. So I'm going to try to hide that naughty end, bad end. Just kidding, we love you. Hide that naughty end inside. You see how I went inside there? Get that little tail down in there. And then to do a whip stitch, we're just going to kind of zigzag our way through the seam. And look here. Okay, so how I like to do my whip stitch, you see how it comes out here? I'm going to start down here, and you're just catching a little bit. I'll flip it that way so you can see. You're just catching a little bit. You're not going too deep into your tiny quilt. And you just keep going. You can make these stitches as small and invisible as you like. I like seeing just a little bit of them. So mine are, I'm going to say medium size. I like seeing evidence of the process, evidence of the hand of the artist. You know what I mean? So here's how it's going so far. I'm just going to continue on the rest of the way, and then I will celebrate with you when this is done. Dang it. Don't you love when your needle on threads? If you ever find, and you have trouble finding a needle, well, of course you can always, thread a needle. You can always lick the thread, and I find instead of trying to put the thread through the needle, if you sit the needle on the thread, that tends to work a little better. Sit the needle on the thread. Don't try to push that soft little thread through a needle. Ain't gonna work. One little thing while I'm doing this that comes to mind is I find, and maybe this is just particular to if you're making holiday ornaments, but when these are hanging on a tree, this is all so lightweight that sometimes I like to put a little weight inside, and usually that's a penny or a nickel. And people say, "Is there a coin in here?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's for good luck." Whatever, right? It just gives a little weight and helps it hang nice on the tree if that's what you're doing with this. Now, if you're making this as a gift for somebody, it's not the holidays, you don't got to worry about that so much. Or maybe you do. You know where you want this to go. You know what you want this to be. But that's just a tip. Something I do. Another thing I do from time to time, in fact, all the time when it's a gift, is I will, before I piece these together, I'll embroider something on the back, right? Let's see if I have an example here to show. Ah, yeah, look at this. Look at this, old friend. Okay, so here's a tiny quilt that I made. And I put the year, little XO, hugs and kisses, Z for me. And it's easier to do that before you sew it all together. So just pro tip, if you're interested in embroidering or doing something special on the back, do that before you sew all of this together. It's nice to have that signature. It's nice to have that commemoration of whatever the time or the event or the intention is. Last stitch, folks. Here we go. Okay, so here I am going to tie a knot on this one because it's a external seam, not hidden inside the seam. To do that, my favorite knot is, I'm just going to do a stitch here. Okay, to do that, I don't even know what kind of knot this is called. I wish I had a name for you. I call it Zak's knot, except I did it in a minute. Okay, here's how it works. You make a stitch, you leave a little loop. You see how I'm leaving a little loop? You come back inside that loop, pull it through, but leave a little loop. You're leaving a second loop now, because what you're going to do is go through that loop. And then you pull it all the way down, and it's so tiny. I don't even know if the camera can pick up, but there's a little knot right there. If you're feeling worrisome about it, you can do another one. I often do. Because why not? You've already put all this work into it. Make it last. Okay, so again, that's a very little loop. So you make a stitch, leave the loop, go in through that loop, leave a second loop, go in through that second loop, and then pull tight. To bury your thread, you just insert your needle into the seam somewhere inconspicuous, go up as much as you can, pull your thread in, snip, and ta-da! you are done. And that's how you make a tiny quilt. There's so much you could do with this, right? This is just a basic demonstration of how this might go work. You could put so many more patches in here. You could embroider it. You could, oh, I made one that had a lot of French knots on it one time, which was beautiful. You could do some fun stitching around the edge. Like I said, you could do some sweet little things on the back. Your imagination is your limit here. But this is the rudimentary basics on how to make a tiny quilt. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Happy sewing. Good luck. I'd love to see what you do.